Hi, everyone, and welcome back to LL Sports TV. Hope you're all well. Some sad news to report today. In the early hours of the morning, news came through that George Foreman, former Olympic gold medalist, former two-time heavyweight champion of the world, the eldest heavyweight champion of the world ever, International Boxing Hall of Fame inductee, certified boxing legend, successful businessman, and entrepreneur George Foreman passed away at the age of 76. At the time of filming, I'm not aware of the cause of death, but I am able to say with certainty that he's now passed away. George Foreman, then, born in Texas, America in 1949, by all accounts was quite a troubled kid, got into quite a lot of trouble when he was younger, got into a lot of fights, etc., etc. You know, the usual story. Sport was his savior, and that sport he chose was boxing, which makes a lot of sense given that as a young man he was a big, strong guy, got into a lot of street fights, was able to handle himself. So he found boxing, and that provided him with a level of stability and purpose. And he went on to have a relatively short but very successful amateur career, which culminated in him winning Olympic gold medal in Mexico in 1968. And that Olympic gold medal was quite notable because in 1968 there was a lot of, how can I put it, social and political trouble in America at the time. There was a lot of stuff with civil rights going on. And in 68 games, Tommy Smith, famous American sprinter, he was the one who made the back power salute. Now, George Foreman also won gold at that games, and he chose to celebrate his gold medal in a slightly different way. Rather than adopt the Black Power stance that a lot of the athletes were doing at that time, George Foreman, on the other hand, was waving the American flag, and that caused a lot of ire amongst the black people in America at that time and around the world. It was seen as a statement that went against the Black Power movement and the Civil Rights movement, and he did get quite a lot of stick for it. So yeah, that's an interesting point of note. But yeah, so he won the Olympic gold in 1968. He turned pro the following year and immediately started blasting out everyone in front of him. He was described as a mean, menacing man, underrated boxing skills, a lot of heart, but devastating power in both hands. This guy was literally putting people to sleep. He was cutting a swathe through the heavyweights at that time. And I think it was in 1973 he got his world title opportunity in Jamaica, of all places, against another legend, Joe Frazier, who was the world champion at that time. Joe Frazier, we all know, had the fights with Ali, had beaten Ali in Madison Square Garden in 1971. So George Foreman squared off against Joe Frazier in Jamaica in 1973. George Foreman was the underdog for that fight, believe it or not, but he blitzed Joe Frazier in 2 rounds, including 6 knockdowns, one of which is a highlight reel knockout. You may have seen it, an uppercut that George Foreman landed on Joe Frazier, which literally lifted Joe Frazier off his feet. And I kid you not, you can go on YouTube and watch it for yourself. Amazing. He made 2 defenses of the title, including another spectacular 2-round blowout of another great fighter, Ken Norton, blew him out. And so by this time, George Foreman was building a fearsome reputation as one of the most destructive punchers in the history of boxing. But there was one man that was looming large, and that man was Muhammad Ali, and he was calling out George Foreman. I think Ali at that time was about 31, 32 years old. He was considered by many boxing pundits at that time to be past his best. He'd had a few defeats, but here he was calling out George Foreman. Some people said it was ridiculous. Some people was even predicting that George Foreman might kill Ali or do him serious damage. But in any event, he was a clear underdog going into that fight. The 2 of them fought in Zaire, the famous Rumble in the Jungle. It's a fight that will go down as one of the most iconic and most watched fights of all time. An aging Ali up against the younger, fearsome, menacing, power-punching George Foreman. But Ali shocked the world. He employed the rope-a-dope tactics, which is basically to shell up on the ropes like that. Took the punches on the arms, the elbows, took the odd body shot, took the odd head shot as well. But crucially, In the heat of Zaire, Africa, George Foreman started to run out of gas. And by the 8th round, Muhammad Ali turned the tables and knocked George Foreman out in probably one of the most watched heavyweight fights of all time. One of the most watched boxing fights, without a doubt. Legendary stuff. So George Foreman lost his title in a massive upset, and apparently he didn't take it too well. He was expected to win spectacularly. Instead, he got knocked out, and apparently it affected him quite a lot. He went into a period of depression, but he did have another 5 fights after that, including an absolute war against Ron Lyle. Again, if you ever get a chance, go on YouTube and watch these fights. They're out there. That fight with Ron Lyle was an amazing fight. Both of them getting knocked down, both of them getting hurt. George Foreman prevailing in an absolute war. He also beat Joe Frazier again in 5 rounds. Had a few other fights before running into Jimmy Young. Now, this fight was notable because Jimmy Young, good fighter at the time, good boxer. He fought George Foreman in 1977, and he beat George Foreman. It was an upset. And after the fight, George Foreman claims that he had an out-of-body experience in which he hallucinated and saw all different things and heard voices speaking to him. He then promptly announced his retirement from boxing and found religion. He became an ordained minister. And he was actually out the ring for 10 years. I think he came back in 1987. And by this time, he had reinvented himself from that mean, menacing, intimidating figure to a smiling, self-deprecating elder statesman of boxing. He now called himself the punching preacher and said he was back in the ring to raise funds for his church. And during this period, I mean, he wasn't just around for a few fights. He had quite a lot of fights, 20 plus fights, including good wins over Dwight Kwawi. He fought Burt Cooper, beat him, really good fight, that one. Famously knocked out Jerry Cooney. Again, another highlight, a real knockout that you can watch on YouTube. He also did really well in a losing effort to a young at the time Evander Holyfield. Did much better than expected against Holyfield. In fact, Evander Holyfield always says that that fight he had against Foreman was one of his hardest fights ever. So yeah, that was a really good effort. Foreman also lost a decision to a young at the time Tommy Morrison. Tommy Morrison, who was quite a fearsome puncher himself, but it was noticeable in that fight. He did a lot of moving, stayed away from the power, boxed smart behind the jab, and outpointed George Foreman. But even though Foreman lost, he still took a lot of credit in losing, maintained his aura, is still very much relevant. And that led to him getting an unlikely title opportunity in 1994 against the 28-year-old Michael Mora, who was the WBO champion at that time. George Foreman was 45. Michael Mora was expected to beat him quite comfortably. It was seen by many as a bit of a novelty fight. So yeah, George Foreman got the unexpected title shot, and he shocked the world because he became the oldest heavyweight champion of the world by knocking out Michael Mora, and in what can only be described as a truly momentous achievement. He was behind on points, but he boxed intelligently. He stayed in there, waited for his opportunity, and when it came, he delivered, knocked out Michael Mora, shocked the world. He then made 3 defenses of that title before losing to a much younger Shannon Briggs in a fight, by the way, that a lot of people thought that George Foreman did enough to win. But he retired from boxing after that fight. I think that was 1997, retiring with a record of 81 fights, 76 wins, 68 by KO, and 5 losses. So really, really good record. Shortly after, he was inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame. And in retirement, he took up boxing punditry. He carried on his preaching work. He became a TV and media personality. He also became a successful businessman and entrepreneur. Now, many of you know the George Foreman grills. I mean, I've got one. I don't know of anyone that didn't buy one or doesn't have one now. And that achieved worldwide success. So yeah, he was very successful in that sphere as well in business. A real character, real lovable, avuncular character. Yeah, George Foreman captured the minds and hearts of people right across the world. One of the biggest characters ever in boxing. and a true boxing legend, without a doubt. So, yeah, man, very sad to hear the news about George Foreman. Rest in peace. And also, I want to send my commiserations and my thoughts to all his family, his friends, his associates, and everybody that knew him. George Foreman, he's survived by 12 children. I think he had something like 7 daughters and 5 sons, all of whom are called George, by the way. So that's a little indication of the character of the man. But yeah, George Foreman, man, what can I say that haven't been said already? A real legend of the sport. Will be sorely missed. I'm sure what you're watching now, my tribute will be repeated right across the boxing fraternity. And that's quite right, so, because this guy was a real legend of the sport. But anyway, that's all for now. Like I said, sad news today, George Foreman passing away. Thank you so much for watching this video. Really appreciate it. If you're new to the channel, please like, share, and subscribe. Take care, and I'll catch you on the next one. I'm out.